Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful to see such a robust and lively crowd this on a Thursday morning for this event, Latinx Poetry Now. My name is John Alba Cutler. I'm an associate professor in the English department, and it's such a privilege to be able to host two poets whose work I just deeply admire, and also whose work I've taught in the last 2 weeks to my students, many of whom are here today. So I'm just so grateful to have J. Michael Martinez and aracelis girmay here to share their work with us. Before we begin, I want to thank the many sponsors of this event, the Arts Research Center first and foremost, and Lori McAfee, if you want to just give a wave, who's done a lot of the legwork. We're so grateful to you. Yeah, absolutely. The Department of English, the Engaging the Senses Foundation, and the Center for Latin American Studies. We're grateful for all of their support. This event is associated with both Latinx Heritage Month and, as I mentioned, a course I'm teaching, English 137, which is a course on Latinx poetry. I just want to say 2 words or so about the conception of this event, which was that as I was thinking with Lori and Beth Paitot, who's the director of the Art Research Center, about a kind of event that would fit the sort of vision of the class, part of what I've been trying to do with this class is just to show my students the range and diversity and excitement of the world of contemporary Latino, Latina, Latinx poetry. As we were talking about people that we could possibly invite that I was teaching on the syllabus, I really wanted poets who represented very different formal and stylistic approaches, different thematic preoccupations, and I think we just really hit the jackpot in terms of the 2 poets that we have here today. For the format of the event, we'll go as follows. I'm going to introduce each of the poets individually, and they'll come up. So we'll have the first poet come up, and then I'll come back up and introduce the second once they're done. And then after the readings, we're going to sit up here and have a short moderated conversation. I have a few questions. They're really difficult. It's going to be like meet the press kind of thing to ask the poets. And after that, we'll have hopefully plenty of time for questions and answers from the audience. I brought all of the books. I'm actually missing one book. I don't know. I just moved offices, so I blame my disorganization. But I'm going to do a little show and tell as I introduce the poets. Our first poet, long listed for the National Book Award, winner of the National Poetry Series, and a recipient of the Walt Whitman Award from the Academy of American Poets, J. Michael Martinez is the author of 4 collections of poetry: Heredities from LSU Press, In the Garden of the Bride House, which is the one that I'm somehow missing, from University of Arizona Press, Museum of the Americas from Penguin Press, which my class just read 2 weeks ago, and Tarta Americana, which just dropped from Penguin Press, I think like last week. Hot off the presses, really excited about this. His poetry may be found in various publications: PBS, the Poetry Society of America's New American Poets Series, New American Writing and Poetry. And in addition, his writings have been anthologized in Asra Press's The Arcadia Project, North American Postmodern Pastoral, Rescue Press's The New Census, 40 American Poets, Counterpath Press's Angels of the Americlips, New Latinate Writing. Martinez has read, lectured, or taught at universities and organizations nationwide, including the Folger Shakespeare Library, the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage Conference, the Community of Writers at Squaw Valley, Naropa University, the University of Colorado at Boulder, the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, the Tucson Festival of Books, Canto Mundo, George Mason University, and more. He is an assistant professor of English literature and creative writing at San Jose State University. Please welcome J. Michael Martinez.
Hello, everyone. First off, I just want to say thank you to our hosts and to John, the Arts Research Center, for inviting us. I'll put my water down here, I guess. Is this volume okay? Right here? All right, excellent. There are those writers who are fantastic storytellers and comedians when they come up to the podium to read, and then they end up reading like 2 poems. I'm not one of them. I can incidentally be funny, and perhaps that'll happen, but I'll let you all decide that. But I will begin with my first published poem from Heredities. And I'll read through both my first books. I can just, give a little tour of them, and then we'll arrive at Tarta Americana. This is entitled The Lady of Guadalupe's Dream and Jade Ruin. And she said, "Does darkness list our erasures and become beautiful?" And she said, "Those I love I translate into Advent and wild foxgrape, the blind staggers of water." And then she said, "The dead will return, narrow gates unlatched." To which she replied, "His body is air written between my hands," which is when she carved an arrow upon the linden leaf and shaft, which is when the butterflies hatched from her footprints, which was how she cut her fingers with seaweed and bitter jewel, which was when our martyr became the hour of unsung reeds. And I'm one of those poets who likes a lively crowd, so if you like something or if you don't like something, you can totally shout out loud. You know where, I know the custom is you don't clap until the very end. Don't worry about that. You do you. This is called White's Song. She leans her head into the white, sheets a cruel sweetness. Her eyes doe blind, she prays, lilac in hand, counting, calyx to stamen, stamen to leaf. Her faith is of the body. What is the body in the bed? Lilac and grace. In a vase, lilacs push thin, wade into white, water turned milk, coursing through cut stem, water pale white song. Yes. Grandmother in sheets. No. Grandmother is a photo of white sheets. She's beside a vase of lilacs. Yes, leaf blind. No, not yet. She bakes bruised apples, sweet with sugar, cinnamon, brings the shriveled sweet things on a plate, stems warm, a plate of stems. No, the plate was from before. A photo is the word for before, the distance the body reaches for essence and image. Grandmother is the word for white image and apples. The word is stem and apples falling. Fall, speech fall, sees speech fallen. Grandmother quilts lilacs on a sheet, quilts lilacs on speech. A daffodil in her hair as needle and thread, threads speech. She threads her white her wreath of speechless lilac and keep. Grandmother leans her head into the white sheets. A cruel sweetness. Her mouth is deathless, calyx to stamen, stamen to leaf, is deathless, is, her leaf sings, deathless is, mouth water pale, water song pale white. I've always yearned for that moment in readings where, I was always jealous of those poets who have multiple books, and they can, pick and choose which poems to read, because, they know that they're the crowd pleasers. I got there finally, so I'm pretty happy. I know. Or at least, thanks for entertaining me. This is called In Dominion, the Breath's Hammer, the botanical's confession of distinction. Bowed beneath bloated limbs, the name grew like anemone. A colt cantered before her, snorting steam. Taking a handful of sand, she fed the animal its passage from dust. She said, "My pet, my grace, tear us pale, perish my lungs so wingless." On grasses beneath the man and woman were each other. The woman took the man's head in her hands, parting his scalp into a gulf. A carob tree grew from the opening, his brown hair coiled coral vine through the branches. He caressed her neck, eased his hand in until her trachea was sheathed in palm. Coiled in bows, he said, "When grace is exhaled, life is time without negation. Our bodies bridged across dust-weighted air." Said, "Consign the tongue to the hesitance between hammer and peel. The body will awake, clothed in acacia." Against a tree, she said, inscribed between leaves light sharpened, trumpet shaped, a raw human forest resigns between tongue and tooth. The man took her hair, wound it into braid. From stem and branch I saw the animals approach. White moth, magenta flecked wing incandescent, sea urchin, broad-tailed hummingbird, wasp wing herded by wren song and lion breath down rows of juniper smoke. With wooden hook and blade, man and woman peeled the animal's skin from scalp. The bay, the caw of lamb and crow, cut from tongue bound in myrtle. The pelt, the hind, become alphabet. Am I a bit breathy? All right. So they'll adjust the levels in recording, I guess. This is from Museum of the Americas. It's called Lord Spanglish Me. It's one of those poems that you sit down and if you have like a thing that you do, it comes really quickly. And you're like, I wanted to do something different than myself. So this is myself that I ended up writing despite myself. Lord, Spanglish mi abuela para mí. Boil the orange rind beneath the syntax peeled of her name. Translate naranja into familia, the grove into tea, the tea into the talisman of her hands' soft work, the color of fold, unfolded and sung. Lord, Spanglish mi abuela para mí. Her kingdom creation come. Her gray hair grown down the fears, her pale hand plucking my tears as plums, as love ransoms the noun within. Her childhood unseeded beneath the ravage, the creek drowning, her colony home, the aphids and the oak, her velvet Christ flood spent and godless. Lord, Spanglish my mother for me. Carve shipless the light my world is etched by, the wreck salt so she may move among the beryl water. Tied red with silt beneath baptism, her eyes cast in the shadow of the soft of lavender grown there. Lord, Spanglish my language for me and for you, that I may break open the promised space of my fear and become ladder, and I may finally skin my ravage, that I may bear the estranged seasons, for I know we are creatures of metal, without answer, a lost spring whose lips rest where intimacy resigned, the shapes of want, our honey suckered from dust. That's very sweet of you. I think I'm going to do all my grandma poems. talk about traditions. This is the wake of Maria de Jesus Martinez. Disbudded chrysanthemum florets ring her casket, oak laid. My grandmother's arms cross, gilded gold, her bold buttoned suit lies black against white satin. Oak grieved, her daughter kneels, tear-pearled and sorrow-sung. Tear-pearled and sorrow-sung, the furnace's hunger within my mother's cry. Love mothered what love must hate, the gasping erasure be her before, cut before away. Before away, Maria Jesus grins sly beneath her waist-long silver hair, cigarette thin in her slender hand. She glances outside the frame into images' inevitable collapse. Or with what paper soft? Collapse, or with what paper soft, steepled hands, she leads me to dream in fatherlessness. Some men wear every organ a throne. I wear my grandmother's hearse, a shell gasping black, burdened by body. I mean to say I am hiding. I mean I am holding her rosary, as pale oval as her rosary. Peppermint candies, half sucked and sugar sweet, bone blanched, slick with the extended definition of some distant steepled faith. As pale oval as steepled faith, as pale oval as death bound her hands, a rose nest of mood and form unbridled from within. Unbridled from within, a ceaseless cancer ate her silence, and now 4 mourner rows stand before my fugitive eyes, and I agreed to conduct. I agreed to conduct her a dollhouse. Sermon of plastic pink comfort flowers, a sermon of plastic comfort pinking, and I said death matroned my mother of her mother matron, a 3-year slice of night falling, and what patient black rot shook her lung black. Her lung black, I said, I know why the lamb white wooed the lion, to uplift the last of all letters, of all the ardor pure God make God my unconscious soon-born sober sunburn. Soon you cry I, too soon cry, soon to soon, for each other soon sung, for each is soon. For each is soon, I said. My mother knelt and cried, I said. There's only the fall. Like leaves grasping, we are each other's first sketch. The shoots bud upon the branch, and I say, I think we are loved, and I know we are loved. For each is soon, I said. You held for each is soon. So, I have about a minute and a half left, and I'll read one from my latest book, Tarta, which I encourage you to check out. And I have some copies if you'd like later. You can come talk. This is called Ichipitla Klezotiotl, the Filth Eater. It begins with a little quote. The blossom growing from the heart is small, a seemingly insignificant detail, and yet it is the flower of redemption. For the goddess Klezotiotl tells us that we're all worthy of her forgiveness. And this comes from Mi Corazon, Mexico. Lady Filth Eater, fold me, a once upon a time scab boy with pale breasts and marble bones. At 19, a slice of white peach across the bed frame, face scarred into hunger, a baby scooped lipless. And my days past and after images laid clear before the blur. My lady, fold me in fishnets and mascara. I swallowed eyes like almonds, face powdered for purty, carmine lips, lipstick languid. I squatted, nude over a bowl of milk on a mirror to lure my altar boy, to boy my lurid altar. And my filth eat me, and I'm 7 again. below the splash for the first abuse in the rec center pool, wearing wet, translucent white swim trunks when the swimming coach, a 16-year-old girl, took me to the end of the pool to teach the frog stroke, the breaststroke, face down, legs moving as if gathering the water to itself. My arms parting the water before me, the movement of propulsion to gather and divide. She held me up afloat. With her right hand, the soft warmth against my clavicle. With her left hand, she reached into my shorts and fingers clenched in fist around my question, murmuring, "Do you like it?" Enfolded lady eater, I don't remember. Enfolded lady filth, I remember. The gasping for air, my fear to reply to touch. The next day, crossing the crosswalk to the rec center, the asphalt tar became gutter gray. My body trembled and the world's colors imploded. Television static, all blinking snow. Consumed trauma's form. 1,000 hammers clanging, a scream fingers clinging as I listen through the purr to the teardrop growing the grape. Enfold me, my filth, innocent again, as pretty as an altar girl. My skin, my face, a noose I'd knot for bow and cream. My skin folds in and out, ecstatic the stagnant fold. Lady filth eater, fondle my nouns furious, fiddle me in skirts, skin scarred into pretty, for I pale the scars in powder, peach lit and leech lipped to suckle any noun's pout. Thank you.
Aracelis Girmay is a poet who makes work across genres. She's the author of the poetry collections The Black Maria, which yes, absolutely, which we just studied in my class, Kingdom Animalia, and both of those from Boa, and Teeth from Curbstone. For this work, she was a finalist for the Neustadt International Prize for Literature. Her books have also been named finalists for the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and the Connecticut Book Award. She's received fellowships from the Whiting Foundation, Civitella Ranieri, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Cave Canem Foundation, among others. Girmay is the author of the forthcoming chapbook and was a flower made in collaboration with book artist Valentina Amestica. Other recent work includes a picture book collaboration with her sister entitled What Do You Know? And the forthcoming picture book collaboration with artist Diana Ihaida entitled Kamau and Zuzu Find a Way, both with Enchanted Lion books. Recent works in poetry and prose have been published or are forthcoming in Astra, the Paris Review Online, Periphery Journal, Jewish Currents, the New York Times Magazine, and eFlex. Girmay is the editor of How to Carry Water, Selected Poems of Lucille Clifton, and So We Can Know, Writers of Color on Pregnancy, Loss, Abortion, and Birth. She is on the editorial board of the African Poetry Book Fund and is the editor-at-large of the Blessing the Boats selections from Boa. Please welcome Aracelis Girmay.
Wow, thank you so much, John and Lori and all of the organizers whose names I don't know. J. Michael, wow. My heart is beating hard. It's incredible to hear you read. And thank you, John. Thank you. I know I said that twice. So I'm going to start with a poem by Lucille Clifton that I hope I have by heart. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman? What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come, celebrate that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Lucille Clifton. Wow, it's really powerful to be here. I feel like I'm still arriving. We just moved from New York in July, and I'm seeing Oscar Bermeo, who's here, who I haven't seen in so long. It feels like a time of such reunions. Yes, yes. Great poet. And so I'm trying to listen to what to read, and I think I'll begin. This makes sense with this poem that's from a cycle in the Black Maria that's thinking about people trying to reach Southern Europe over the Mediterranean, thinking as somebody of the Eritrean diaspora of also this conversation I had with my grandfather. It all feels connected to some of the questions I imagine we'll be thinking about together. So this is to the dead. Beloveds, beneath the surface of your last place, the tiny, oblivious fishes form wreaths above the seagrasses and their long reach. Some mornings in my own city far away, I run to greet you, come to me as sea, and carry myself out into your long, dark time like a child meeting its older cousins. I touch your teeth and give you the single word of my body. I am a woman again at the side of Aboy Hale's bed. Aboy, who is 96. He is brushing my acacia hair. He is holding my arm. He says, moving his hand to mean all around us, that this is my home. He means Adisogdo, but he also means the world. Though I think in America that I am there and he is here, that we are different or far, really we are each other. My bones are your bones, he says. His teeth are my teeth, and my smiling is his smiling. He holds my arm tight until it is a stone, a bone. He smooths my hair with force. I am a horse, the long, dark skin of the water, the talking aboy of the water, the brushing back my acacia hair, washing my face. When we are done, I cross the sea back into air and return to the traffic of the streets I know. I am marked by the dead, your sea letters of salt and weeping. Now I am ready to lay myself down on the earth, to listen to the instructions for how to talk of love and land, to sing of home in the horrible years, and to fill my language like the stars do with the light anyway of a future tense. Thank you. This is on poetry and history after the great poet Joy Harjo. It really feels like it's a note, like I noted what I witnessed. On a panel of men who spoke about history and poetry, she sat quietly for much of it. The men were saying strong things, good things, but in authoritative voices, voices that knew they knew things, and she remained the only quiet one. She listened as if she weren't listening. Her face looked forward. Her quiet seemed distant. It had a straight back, and then she interrupted one of the men and said something like, "That reminds me of the time." And she spoke of a fellow Native American teacher in her region who committed suicide near the end of one of the years, and how he must have been hurting and isolated and in pain, but not many people spoke about that or spoke about his death or their loss when he died. It was swept under the rug. That was the phrase she used. And she said she was at home one day and looking out of the window, and she noticed a black thread or string there floating in the frame, and she observed it for a while, floating there, until she realized that that black string was grief, the grief of the professor, the grief of the students, her own grief, the grief of silence, a historical grief, and that she knew that it was her job to take that thread and put it somewhere, weave it into the larger tapestry. She made a gesture then, as if that tapestry were just above her head. She said it was her job to put that grief in its place, or else someone else, some child or grown person, would be out walking and just walk right into it without knowing what it was they'd walked into, what they had then inherited in a way, what they were then carrying and feeling, the danger of that, the grief of that. And that was what she said about poetry and history, and that is all I remember from all of the things that were said that entire day. I think a lot about that moment and how I felt as somebody who was sitting there watching, which is really interesting to think about. I was so nervous, like as she was sitting there and people were talking and she was quiet, and I was like, why isn't she saying anything? And then I was like, and then when she said that reminds me and she started talking, I was like, oh my gosh, like she's talking in a different language than they are. Like, is this okay? Of course it's okay. Of course we need each other to speak in all of our languages, but like that anxiety and fear, really. And so besides the way that she talked through her experience and the ways that she thinks about poetry and history and grief, I also think all the time about the way that that moment holds hands with Audre Lorde talking about transforming silence into language and action. Like there's so many ways to carry one's language, and I carry such fear about it. And so that feels like the other part of the poem that is maybe not clearly written. So this, I'll read another poem from here, and then I'll read some new poems. This is from a section called The Black Maria, in which I'm thinking about a lot of things, but thinking about medical systems, healthcare, my dad's illness, and getting ready to pregnancy and getting ready to have a baby and having a baby and going to the technician's office, and blackness and whiteness and the white imagination. So in fact, I'll read two sections from this, section 2 and 8. 2. I too am built out of a question about the sky, a body bearing things ordinary as light. And when I realized this, I was on my back, my legs in the stirrups, and the lights of the technician's office were dimmed as she slid the wand up inside me after, like a room, the baby emptied me, and space is what I thought, as the technician clicked her machine for a close-up here and there, which was really all of me, and the seeming limitlessness of my body's dark. How did I spend so many years dismarveling the body, its powers and beauties, thinking the world a place I did not belong to, thinking myself alien, though of course it was always ever my only home. And in that room, my heart then had a brazen dream and drew with its brown fingers its own curtains back so that I could see the courtyard inside it, where the peacocks swept the dirt with the dark of their closed tails, within which the green burned secretly like a fever, and I saw my 6 words and their ghosts, and the mothers nodding from beneath the pepper tree, and a well at the center of the yard of my heart, and I held the dead given pail, so lowered it down into my chest, then up, and like that was taught by the elders to lift sorrow out from my sorrow. 8. How did it happen? The boy, the cops, my body in this poem, the body bearing something ordinary as light opens, as in a room somewhere the friend opens in poppy, in flame, burns and bears the child out. When I did, it was the hours and hours of breaking, the bucking of it all, the push and head, not moving, not an inch until, when he flew from me, it was the night who came flying through me with all its hair, the immense terror of his face and noise. I heard the stranger, and my brain, without looking, vowed a love him vow. His struggling merely to be split me down with the axe to chew. How true the thinness of our hovering between the realms of here, not here. The fight first to open, then to breathe, and then to close. Each of us entering the world, and entering the world like this, soft, unlikely then, the idiosyncratic minds and verbs. Beloveds, making your way to and away from us across the centuries, inside the vastness of the galaxy, how improbable it is that this iteration of you or me might come to be at all. Body of fear, body of laughing, and even last, a second. This fact should make us fall all to our knees with awe, the beauty of it against these odds, the stacks and stacks of near misses and slimmest chances that birthed one ancestor into the next and next. Profound, unspeakable cruelty who counters this, who does not see, and so to tenderness I add my action. And I'll read, thank you, one or two from here, and that'll be time. Flies. I feel like I want to say something about this to protect it. I was reading this poem, and a friend of mine was like, for the first time I was reading it, sharing it, and she got the giggles. She was like, "Oh, you're so funny." And I was like, "Oh, that hurts because I'm being so serious. I'm being so serious." So I just want to, don't laugh. Okay, you can laugh if you want, but I'm being so serious is what I mean to say. I'm going to say one more thing about it, which is I'm so interested in like the moments when it feels clear. I don't know what the moments are made of, but when it feels clear that like the fly, like when there are moments when you're like, oh, are we family? Like fly, June bug, leaf. Like there are moments that feel more and less like that, depending on the moment. This is made of that. When I come home, they rush to me, the flies, and they would take me in their small arms if I were smaller. So fly this way, that way, enjoy, they welcome me. They kiss my face, one, two, they say, come in, sit at this table, sit. They hold one hand inside the other and say, eat. They share their food, sit close to me, sit. As I chew, they touch my hair, they touch their hands to my crumbs, joining me. The rim of my cup on which they perch, the milky lake above which. They ask for a story. How does it begin? Before I was a child, and so on. My story goes on too long. I only want to look into their faces. The old one sits still, I sit with it, but the others busy themselves now with work. And after the hour, which maybe to them is a week, a month, I sleep in the room between the open window and the kitchen, dreaming though I were the Sierra, though I were their long-lost sister. They understand that when I wake, I will have to go. One helps me with my coat. Another rides my shoulder to the train. Come with me, come, I say. No, no, it says, and waits with me there, the rest whistling, touching my hair. though maybe these are its last seconds on earth. In the light, in the air is this love, though it is little my errand, and for so little I left my house again. Thank you.
I wasn't here for the mic check. Is that sound okay? Thank you both. What a beautiful and moving set of readings. I'm gonna just lead off. As you know, this is a visit to a Latinx poetry class. We read both of your work under the frame of Latinx poetry. And that's a frame that can enable some things and maybe limit other things. And we've talked about some of the work that Latinidad in both ways, what it enables and what it limits. But I'd be curious to hear you speak about that in relation to your own work, each of you, how you think of yourselves in relation to that particular label, Latina, Latino, Latinx, what it has done for you, maybe what it hasn't done or fails to do. You can use examples or however you think about that. But
Do you want me to start? And
Sure.
I mean, I can say it's. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Thank you. A vexed, fraught term for me. It's not an idea or concept that felt close to accurate as a way of describing or placing myself. I'm always known and thought of myself as Black from the Puerto Rican or of Puerto Rican diaspora, Eritrean diaspora, and of African America. And there's a way that, for me, I'm interested in, bewildered by the kind of vastness of Latinidad or Latino-ness. As I'm thinking about Alan Pelaez Lopez, who talks about like the geography and land, which is something, and there's such complications and such diverse histories. And as Alan also says, the political strategy and possibility of Latinidad is something I'm interested in, as when race is not erased, when class is not erased. And so I think there's so many generative problems about it that interest me. I'm interested in coalition building there's one, and strategy, and what it forces us to ask if we're really truly looking. Like, so Caribbean is Latino, why and how? So there's a lot of complexities that it holds and that have not been really represented in the public imagination up until recently. And so those are some of the questions and personal feelings. Yeah.
I like that it's a space of the question, that's where the conversation is right now, because for me, any noun in particular is problematic as it kind of has this effect of solidifying and making static something that is constantly evolving and fluid and has undiscovered and unexcavated understandings and logics. And when I think about growing up in a colonia, growing up in poverty, and then being lighter skinned and not being recognized as Chicana, Latino, in certain geographical areas of understanding of how the body becomes to be rendered. And for me, the term acts as very much a kind of empty tent of confluence that has political valencies and uses. But any particular identity that I claim, there's that part of me that refuses that static claim. And for me, what's most intriguing about Latinidad is, as I dig into my own neurodiversity, as I understand my own disabilities, is to see the history of that term and how bodies have been affected by the nation in regards to it. And I'm thinking in particular of Agent Orange, being the exposure of Latinos, Latinas in the Vietnam War to Agent Orange. And for me, it acts just as a general designator for what comes to be a white dominant populace to comprehend bodies of color. But I like to problematize that rendering that occurs as I think in the efforts of inclusion, and also to comprehend that any given identity is already a site of multiplicity and intersectionality. And sometimes those who make a claim to like Latinidad, they may not, like for me, not knowing until my late 30s and early 40s as the account of my neurodiversity or the accounts of my disability, as I come to understand that that's something that was there prior, enduring an identity that I didn't know that until I had access to discourses that could name that. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense to anyone. Okay, thank you. I'll pause there.
I see some nodding over here. That's good. I just want to follow that up. There's really wonderful, generative, and thoughtful responses. And I'll say, J. Michael, that we paid some attention to skin maps in our class discussion. So I appreciate the validation of that choice in your answer. I'm interested in this question also in relation to institutions of poetry, right? So, I'm thinking about, I think both of you have been Canto Mundo Fellows, is that right?
Yeah.
I was faculty 1 year.
Faculty, well, okay. But I'm thinking about the ways that sort of the poetry world is sometimes organized according to the categories of, for the lack of a better term, what we might call administrative multiculturalism. And if you feel, when you're inhabiting those spaces, a sense of expectation that, it sounds like for both of you, Latinidad can be a kind of uncomfortable, just kind of concept, right? And if the kind of expectations in publishing in these institutions that come with certain labels also produce uncomfortable encounters, or if, for the most part, you found the spaces that you occupy to be welcoming and.
Yeah, when I finished answering, I was thinking, there was that second part of the question that I didn't respond to, because it's so striking to me that on the one hand, when I think about these institutions, I know how these institutions work, and how money is allocated, right? And what it is in support of. So like this reading too, for example, when it was like, do you want to read with J. Michael? And then when I saw for this class, and then when I saw the poster, I was like, oh, like this feeling of a few things. Like one, it feels like that is not the word I choose, and I also understand the ways that I am under the umbrella. And two, I feel there's always an awareness of how much space you're taking up, and if I take this, then somebody else who might fit more squarely as far as they are concerned, or who might feel like that is their word. But then it's also important to have a diversity of opinions. So, but all of that happens in like 1 second, right? It's like a root that is like worn ROUTE, in me. And that question of like knowing there's like this limited amount that we've been taught to, what's the word? That we have. And so then what does it mean when I'm one of the voices? That's something always I feel aware of. And when I'm on the other side, as somebody who works for an institution too, like how do you think through those problems from the other side? It's a troubled space. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's interesting. I'm going to begin with a little story. When I first met you, you came in Chicago.
Yep.
And I don't know if you remember this, but I was talking to this person, and they were one of the donors for this big deal, whatever. And I just did a reading, and it was like Latino Poetry Now, something like that.
Yeah.
And that donor, despite our bios having been read at the beginning of the reading, she came up to me, and the first thing she said was, "You speak English so well." I was like, I know my bio said I was from Colorado, Greeley. And I know that poem I just read was about not being able to speak Spanish very well. And then John walked in and was like, "Hi, I was teaching your work." And I was like, whoa, this is just this confluence of two different angles of understanding my body, where I'm from, and location. And because I do have my identities are quite fluxing depending on locations in which I speak and hold discourse, I have grown to not care anymore in regards to, I should say this, like in the sense that I've been excluded from both academic, like being told that at one point I'm too intellectual, or that my poetry isn't poetry, that I've stopped really monitoring the activities of the world, that small world of poetry, that small world of publishing, because my concern is a bit broader, and the politics that govern that smaller world, which is a very rarefied and privileged world to have access to. My space right now is really in a kind of commitment, because I feel like I've had this kind of social and public success in my writing that I've always dreamed about. And where I place myself now is in regards to giving access to the peoples that am fortunate enough to teach or to facilitate those rooms that we call classrooms. I'm not sure if that makes too much sense, but I'm in the sense of pushing against these definitions, but rather making sure that those who aren't participating in that kind of rarefied conversation, they get access to it, and in so doing, opens up what's going to happen in the future. Because I've found that there can be a lot of ego in the poetry communities in regards to who gets seen, the visibilities, or this kind of entitlement to visibilities. And as someone who is always uncomfortable about being visible as a body in the world, it's a consciousness that I'm always kind of entertaining. I hope that even answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both. Thank you. Excuse me. I want to ask a question about poetry and history. I'm so grateful that you read that poem, Aracelis, which was also a thread that we followed through all of El Elegy, that first series of poems. These kind of moments where you're reflecting on, at one point you posed this kind of question about, I'm writing poems of poison or poems of healing, and then that it all seems to kind of be emblematized in that beautiful poem about that experience with Joy Harjo. And I wanted to maybe just pursue that the question of the relationship between poetry and history, which seems like it is so present for both of you in all of your poetry, and ask what resources you have found in poetry for challenging the ways that we encounter history, either in political discourse, popular discourse, formally in schools, because in whether it's thinking about the Eritrean diaspora in Europe, the United States, anti-Mexican violence in the Southwest, the Vietnam War, there are all these sites where your poetry is really not just excavating, but I think really revising how we understand historical experience. So just any thoughts that you have around those?
I am deeply invested, and I'm very happy that the Arts Research Center is hosting this, because for me, poetry is deeply tied up with any and all kinds of research. And I know where I teach at San Jose State, my effort is with my MFA students to promote research creation, which is doing sociology, doing hard sciences, and using our research there to generate poetic artifacts, and understanding that cognitive justice and apprehension needs to happen, and that there are some minds out there where poetry is so much more accessible than your typical history book. And as someone who is neurodiverse, part of my goal is to write my manner of thinking and the way that it constellates as a way to disrupt and to decolonize very linear comprehensions of the historical, let alone within poetry, but history itself. I'll pause there. Hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because for that, so many things I'm thinking about here, listening to you, and to go back to the cycle that you mentioned, John, and thank you for reading it. I've been thinking a lot about like what delineated work makes like when I want my lines broken, and how for several years now I've been super interested in like formally, structurally, and more so in the new work, how to show that this is a tatter, like how to show like the shape of the work, the questions that this is a tiny little like piece. And I'm thinking about writers like Banu Kapil talks about in writing this work that she does where she's looking at her family's history and she's thinking about partition of India and Pakistan, and it feels like it holds hands with Saidiya Hartman talking about Frederick Douglass and like the idea of the spectacle, but like when there's like the center of this terrible brutality that is happening over and over again in your history and mind. And that for Banu Kapil, she talks about how she's interested in like, the wallpaper at the event, or the mark on the leg from sitting down on a chair or a branch, like the mark that's left, like those impressions. And I've been with her work and Saidiya Hartman's work since this book, and have been thinking a lot about how poetry feels like, for me, a space to not know everything, and to point to the gaps and the one way, and like the text that, I think about this in your work so much, the text that can't be mastered. And I think that happens in all kinds of genres, in all kinds of ways. And lately I've been thinking a lot about how to keep a relationship with my very close people who are now in their deaths, and how what poems or language at all may or may not have to do with that, and like how to make a sound that feels, like not that like that feels, how to make, which again I think of your work. So those are some of the ways that I'm thinking about, poetry and history.
Yeah.
I just want to add one thing, that history is always already made. We're making it, and it's an artifact. And for me, when I think about poetry and the formal conceits that go into it, the ways that those particular formal conceits can expose and open up blind spots in the historical record that only metaphor can accomplish. That's important to me, since if history is always in the act of being invented to do our own accounting, and for me, poetry is my language, and the discourse that people call it poetry. To me, it's just like my thinking and writing. And luckily, it has a name, poetry, so it works out.
Thank you both. I'm just like taking copious notes. Like, I don't know if I look more like a student or a fanboy up here, but I'm just so wonderful to think alongside you. I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll turn it over to the audience. And this is an easier question. You're both deep. I see you as both very citational poets, both formally in terms, you have lots of epigraphs that are really fun to think alongside and with you. And then I think also elusively, aracelis, I don't know if this is on purpose, but I just taught Ross Gay's beeholding in the last semester I was in, and I felt like there were just these kind of like connective threads with the Black Maria. So this is the easy question, which is, who are you reading? Who would you recommend? Who do we need to be reading right now?
Man, I just started Van Jordan's When I Wake, I Cried to Dream Again. I think that's what it's called. When I Wake, I Cried to Dream Again. Oh my God. I mean, like, I just started it yesterday, and I was thinking about it with it, like, maybe in my sleep, which I just realized the title, But this is a hard one. I've also been, I'm teaching a class. We're thinking about Audre Lorde and Black feminist poetics, and so her Poetry Is Not a Luxury is on my mind. I've been thinking a lot about it for the past couple of weeks. And there's a new book that's coming out. I'm trying to choose. It's so hard to choose. There's a new book that's coming out. I'm like, do I use my, by Yeli Kamara, Sawada Kamara, who's from Oakland. It's called Be Seidu, like Be Safe Dude, Be Seidu. I recommend that. Especially, it's been really amazing to get to learn and be in Oakland with that book on my mind this last week. Gosh, I'm gonna want to say somebody else. I feel like I'm like, but I'll wait, I'll stop there.
We can be fanboys now, fangirls. I've been reading the work of Heidi Andreas Restrepo Rhodes.
Yeah, you recommended her to me immediately.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
it's good.
They're wonderful. They're
Great
wonderful. And in regards to that, I end up reading a lot more what people call theory. So Crypt Genealogies, which is a wonderful collection navigating and discussing crypt knowledge. And in addition to that, crypt authorship, another collection of writings dealing with disability justice and crypt theory. Yeah, I would recommend those. Definitely open, in terms of cognitive justice and disability justice, those are really wonderful places to begin and have access to.
All right, so that's the syllabus for the rest of our semester. We're going to abandon what we're doing. Thank you both so much. We're going to have questions from the audience now, and I know that my students are here prepared, ready to represent.
Dun dun dun.
And I think we have a microphone moving around. So just raise your hand. It'll come to you.
Is this working? Okay. Hi, my name is Marisol. Thank you so much for taking the time to come speak to our in a class. I know we're like really excited, or at least I am. And I had a quick question going back to Latinidad and different terms, you know, for Hispanic, Latin, Latina, Latino, Latinx, um, and Indigenous. And I think my question within that is, how do you, through your poetry or daily activities, fight like the homogeneity, like the homogenizing of that term? Because through this course and through other courses, I've learned that I might resonate more with the term Indigenous just because I feel like it's more accepting of Afro Latinos, just because, you know, historically, like the historical context behind it as well. But I guess, yeah, like how do you fight you know, the homogenization of these terms through your poetry and through, you know, kind of connecting it to historical times and periods?
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, when I think about my poetry, when I write without, I write toward my own particularities and write toward my experience. And incidentally, when I then go to the political act of publishing, which is a separate act from the writing, and when I select the work that I choose to publish, because poetry for me is a personal act first and foremost, and then it becomes a political act and a public act with the publication. And I think of that the book, as a political object that is going to be performing these kinds of representational acts and events. My goal is to problematize and to disrupt those kind of definitions and considerations, since I'm excluded and included, and there's, what I want to do is just put in there my intersectionalities and use that as a way to define myself without having to be beholden to academic, non-academic communities who employ these terms as ways, as political ways to enact difference. And so for me, navigating that is simply being more and more honest and more personal, knowing that there are going to be people out there, an audience in some way that identifies with the particular intersectional identities that I operate with and the oppressions that I live with. And more, I've begun to step back and not participate in those conversations with what are generally very rarefied academic spaces arguing about what is Latinidad, as opposed to understanding that term as a particular one for utility, for political act and revolution. But really, when I sit and talk with someone, I just want to know them. Like, that's it. I'll pause there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I think when I write or make things, I should say, like, make collages and things. I don't know where I'm going, what I'm doing. I don't want to know. That's like, the process is like, this work is helping me to say, to come to a feeling or to think. It's like a practice of learning. And I hope, I feel like I am not done with its seventh draft, or I'm not done with being with it until something has changed, like something in the way that I am feeling or thinking. And so I'm always, it's like questions or sounds that I'm like, like, you know, that's when you hear like words when you're out and you hear like a sentence might come or like two words that you're like, whoa, why is it? Or an image like the lace on the window, or somebody, one of the elders like walking in my neighborhood before we moved, who was just sitting with the screen in front of them and just looking outside in a dark room, but looking out onto and watching the kids play. And like for whatever reason, it is with me and it's like on my mind or in my heart. And then it's like, okay, go there and ask some questions. And so I don't think I'm ever, for my work, and I think it's obviously different for everybody, I'm never trying to argue or prove. I'm trying to say something true or feel something true. And so that's not one of the questions I carry. That's not my way, or hasn't been so far. And the last thing I'll say is, I realized this when I was like in my 20s and I was in Ghana on this fellowship, and seeing how confused, how people were trying to figure out, which all my life, like people would, I grew up in Southern California in Santa Ana, and people would be like, aracelis? What? That's your name? Because blackness was not part of the imagination of Spanish speakers where I grew up. And so always people trying to figure out or read me. And in my 20s, I remember the sentence came, like, nobody can say you. I mean, I can't even say me. And so that's also, like, I'm never trying to, in my work, which feels like it's the closest thing I have to a spiritual practice is writing. But that it's like fill yourself with what you hold dear, because this world, you know, is not going to do that. And so that's not a question, because it's not one of my preoccupations, if that makes sense, for me. It's an important question. That's a great question.
Hi, I'm Carly. Thank you so much for being here. This is super exciting. Professor Cutler talked briefly about your use of epigraphs, and I'm super interested in that too, because you both are using them in very vastly different ways. Aracelis, you're working more with like looking at other Black feminists. You brought in Joy Harjo. You started with Lucille Clifton. It was really, really cool. And then J. Michael, in your book, you're talking a lot. You mentioned too, you're bringing in a lot of theory. And I'm also interested too on like not just the epigraph, but also like the use of image that you use as well, that you start each section in Museum of the Americas with. So I guess for both of you, how do you think about who specifically, not even who's inspiring you, but who gets to be part of the conversation in your written work, which names are being invoked? And J. Michael, also for you, like specifically, how do you, especially with like the use of the photograph, when making those choices, how do you deal with like the ethical dilemmas of like replicating very colonial work and like violent work on top of that?
Excellent. I like that question. It's interesting. Okay, I'll go. For me, again, like going back to the very notion of the structure of a book, luckily I was privileged enough to be an editor for Noemi Press for a number of years, and I got to read a lot of different book structures, and I learned for myself, and I think I'm pretty good at organizing a book and putting a book together. And so the quotations and the citations ends up being a way for me to help navigate the reader toward a certain way of reading my book, particularly Museum of the Americas. And that comes out of being in a PhD program for 7 years, getting to an ABD level, and then discovering how unethical one of my advisors was, and then refusing and walking away from the PhD. And I was pissed and wounded. And so I put together that book, and it was a culmination of all those 7 years of work. And so I had a lot to say. In regards to the images and the reproduction of quote unquote violence, to me, those images aren't in public, they're archival images that are not in public circulation. However, they're a necessary demonstration of the violences that ideologically, in my mind, are still occurring. And I have ways individually to comfort myself. However, knowing that comfort is for me, and that if people are uncomfortable with those images, yeah, they should be. And they need to be known. And if there is some type of ethical question that needs to occur in regards to them, the poetry is doing the work to conversate about the complications of these images. But for me, they need to be out there, need to be seen. And if it makes people uncomfortable, learning is uncomfortable. And that's okay.
Can you hear me okay? I'm trying not to touch it again, but I have a quiet voice. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Yes? Okay, just let me know if not. Yeah, it's so, I mean, I'm so interested in ways that we can cite in epigraphs as conversations, pieces of conversation, signals of some of where you've been and who you've been thinking with or against or toward, and it's tough because I feel like there's always so much more. It's like, there's so, like, the weather of the work, I could go on forever. Like, in the ways that we are so much more and made of so much more. And so for me, there are some pieces that feel so essential, or moments with people or friendships that feel so essential to, like, note, because it's so clear that this is the conversation, and I'm hoping that if anybody reads the work that they know that this is a part of the conversation I'm in right now. And then there are other moments where it's like, oh, I should, like, or I'll look back and I'm like, oh, I should have said this one here, or that line is so much in conversation with this person's line, I had no idea, or, so it's an ongoing practice of figuring out, like, how to signal and when, and what to do when you've forgotten to signal. So I just, it's, I'm thinking about notes at the back of books, notes at the back of other people's books that I so love, and it feels like there's a temptation to just put a whole reading list or like 5 syllabi in the back, So I know I'm greedy, and so figuring out how to communicate something that is open but also clear enough to be, like, holdable for a second even. And so constraints, like the constraint of the book, is an interesting one, an impossible one to do all of the things I want to do, but yeah.
Could I build off something that you just said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking in response to Aracelis is that the books are really the beginning of a conversation that I want to have, and books and publication is a way for community formation to occur. And so to me, they're invitations for questions like this, and to meet people and to dialogue and be like, oh, thank you for reading my little book. I'm very happy. I'd love to talk. And I would love to talk about, like, oh, well, how does it exclude? How does it include? And to me, that's a developing conversation. So the books are more at the beginning toward that, of just a beginning dialogue. And so it's an invitation. I'm here to talk. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Vincente Perez. I have a question for the fellow poets that are in the room, and also future leaders and folks who are going to be sitting in these rooms deciding who comes to their campus and things like that. So it's kind of a 2-part question. How, as a poet, have you made sure to demand inclusion? And on the other end, what can leaders do to make their spaces, their poetry spaces, the poetry community that they create, more inclusive of poets like you? What is the work that we need to do in order to make it possible for you to not always have to demand your inclusion? but facilitate it.
Man, I love, yeah, you're so clear. I need to think about that question more, but one thing that I think about is how when I was in school, the first poetry workshop I took, I had a lovely, wonderful teacher, but it was clear to me that nobody had imagined, not nobody, over and over again there were instances where it was clear that some people didn't imagine I had anything to say, or that they had nothing to do with anything that I might have to say. It was like, oh, it's one of those poems that it's not for me, so I'm just not gonna engage this. That happened several times, and I didn't imagine. I was kind of stumbling my way through. I did documentary studies work, my internships, and I was thinking through narrative nonfiction, long form lenses, and was so taken and seized by poetry, and I felt like poetry had something to do with that. But I went to do an MFA not really knowing what it was or how much debt I was going into. I was just like, I just want to learn something that I don't think I can learn by myself. Now I have questions. I don't think you need an academy to do that. But all of that is to say, I didn't expect to publish a book. I just was like stumbling my way through because I was like, I want to think with some people hard about some questions that I have. And so kind of along that way, I found myself in some rooms that I didn't imagine I would be in. And I feel like the work that I love, the work that I believe in is necessarily diverse global work of a range of experiences. And so hopefully, I don't know that the word demand, that's not my word, but clarity about commitments and how critical and vital it is that when we are in spaces that we're always thinking about, okay, and then who else or what else, because that's what we need to nourish. So that is a clear commitment wherever I am. But I have to think more about practically what you're asking.
My mind works in a very problematizing way, and so I'm going to problematize the question. Because I would interrogate the publics that are demanding diversity, and I would say that, because I come from a particular punk background, that I want to make my own public, and I don't need to be authorized by anyone. And I've spent quite a bit of time of my life trying to perform a certain type of social justice in poetry in regards to publications, working with Noemi, trying to do my best to help support the various poets that submitted work to there and to get them published and to help and see what I could do. But in the end, for me, when I think about that, I think, well, I want to teach at a state school, so I teach at San Jose State. When I arrived there, it was the first campus that I walked on where everyone was apparently a person of color. Like, it was a minority to see visible white bodies. And when I look at the percentages of people of color at San Jose State that are local to the Bay Area and who are going to that school, my job is in part to be there and to give them access to an education that with the knowledges that I have. And yeah, it may not pay as much as other schools in this area, but I'm doing work that's very important to me, to be available to those students, to be available to them and not to make myself exclusive in ways that oftentimes the careers and institutions that we operate in promote. Because I don't believe in that hierarchy. And people keep telling me, oh, it's socially real. But like, okay, thank you. I'm gonna go back over here and keep doing my art stuff with my students. So.
I see more hands, and I wish that we had more time. I just want to at least take a pause because I know we're at the end of the class time, and I see students who have to get up and move. I don't think that means it's the end of our time together. I know J. Michael and Aracelis are willing to stay and sign some books and answer some questions, so I hope the conversation will continue. But let's take a pause and thank J. Michael and Aracelis again.
Thank all of you. Thank you.